and welcome to my very first YouTube tutorial. So I'm going to get into things pretty much in a sec, but I just wanted to sort of let you guys know what this one's about very quickly. So I'm going to kick things off covering what I feel is like the very basics to get a track going, and that's the drums and percussion. And that's also something I really enjoy working on as well. This is really kind of for the beginners who really just want to get their head around, you know, how to lay out the very basics of a hardcore track. So if you kind of already know that, then maybe wait for me to do a few more tutorials and we can go from there. And also, like with music production, there's loads of different ways of doing the same thing. So I'm not necessarily showing you like the best way or the quickest way. I'm just showing you my method, my techniques, my way of doing things. Okay, so let's get into it. Okay, so here we are inside the program or DAW. If you're not familiar with music production at all, then this particular program is called FL Studio, and it's one of quite a few you can use to produce music on. Others include Cubase, Ableton Live, Bitwig, Logic Pro. It's kind of just down to preference really, which one you want to use. They're all relatively similar. This is just one I kind of liked when I started producing, and I've never really kind of switched from it, and it works well for me. So as you can see, the percussion is down on your left hand side just here. That is everything I'm going to be using on this tutorial, and we're going to start with what I feel is the most important part of a hardcore track, and that's the kick drum. So I'm going to work just within 4 bars for now. Add there Jakka-B UK hardcore template kick, and we're going to add that into mixer channel. And one important thing that I just wanted to highlight is like you wouldn't work from the volume right up like that. It's good to bring the kick down. I know people that bring it down to like 6 dB, and then I know people that bring it down to like sort of 10. I usually work around 8ish, so that's what we're going to do today. There we go, that's the kick. As you can tell, it sounds very hardcore-y. And next up, we are going to chuck in the short clap, which sits on the kick, and that just gives it some extra attack, really extra punch when it's when everything else is going on. I do use a lot of percussion, so don't feel like you have to use everything I've got. I just kind of like layering stuff up. I feel it makes tracks sound a bit more fuller at the end, and then again you turn the clap down or it's just going to sound like this. A bit more subtle there. If I mute it, you can just tell that adds like a tiny bit of difference to the track. So once I've added everything, I'll go through and I'll talk about some light EQ stuff, but I don't want to go overly complicated on this tutorial because that kind of wasn't the idea. It's kind of just help people out to get like the basic layout of percussion, drums, stuff like that. And then in other tutorials I'll go a bit more in depth about things like EQ, compression, etc. So on top of that, I sometimes, I don't always, I add another clap which kind of gives it a bit of like airiness, fills it out again a bit. Turn that down. Whereas I'll take that out. Whereas the first clap kind of gives the attack, and the second one just adds kind of some space. But together they kind of like work really well. That one on its own is pretty weak, so there we go. And then I'd add a closed hat on top of the kick as well. I mean, sometimes you might find a kick that's already got a kind of high-endy sound on it, but I wanted to do this tutorial so just add in as much as I possibly can and would do in a track to kind of give you a really good idea of when you've got everything going on with the percussion and the drums. There we go. And then on top of that, the ride cymbal. Ooh, over there. So I've actually spent time just getting all these samples right for the template before I kind of went into did the tutorial, just to save time, so it wasn't too boring, because I know some tutorials are really boring. Hopefully my voice isn't really boring you. And then kind of like the long clap, that ride just kind of gives a bit of
adds to the space. Where at the moment there's nothing going on the offbeat. And then this is where we start building some sounds into the offbeat. So this is a closed hat loop, which I actually made in Massive. Again, I'll go into that in depth another day. And then on top of that, I'll add an open hat. That just sits on the offbeat as well if I zoom in a little bit. So it doesn't sit on, you've got the instruments that kind of sit on the kick, and then the ones that sit opposite it, which would kind of, if you imagine it, they would kind of be over the bass line once that's in there as well. And I'll add that to mix a track. It might not seem like that closed loop is doing anything, but actually it does add some high end to the whole offbeat scenario. And it's starting to take shape now. And then after that, I'd usually add in something that kind of like gives the track some pace. At the moment, it sounds kind of boring. Like it's not really much to it. It's not loads going on there. So a shaker sound like that. In fact, sorry, double that up. And I've also made that into a loop to kind of show you how that would work. Pace. Now, what I've done with that shaker loop is allow it to its own channel, mute it. The single shaker, I've actually added something that ducks it underneath the kick. And it kind of gives it a nice groove as well, makes it slightly more exciting than just the just running straight through. I think leaving a bit of volume in there kind of gives it a nice groove. So that's cool. And then I don't always do this, but for the sake of the tutorial, you could add in a second kind of like second loop just to kind of act on the first one, and make it sound slightly more exciting. I've found 3 different sounds out of 3 different packs. There we go. And that's also in the same mixer channel, so that's ducking underneath it, so it's giving it a bit of groove as well. I've also turned that into a loop, so I'll drop that in. Give it its own space in the mixer as well. Like that's not something you necessarily have to do. You might be like want the first loop, or you might be kind of okay with the second one. I'm just kind of like chucking in some different ideas to kind of help you guys. And then the claps. So I've layered these up. One on its own. In fact, would just sit off like that. And that gives the track a bit of groove as well. I mean, like hardcore, at the speed it's made at, it's very difficult to get a groove in a track. So there are a few ways you can kind of add some groove to it and just make it sound a little bit more exciting, which I think is important. And I'll add those two to channel as well. Bring the volumes down. Now, those two instruments are very similar, and it'd be annoying to have to move those up and down, up and down, up and down all the time. So what I'd do is put those into a group so that they run out of one channel. So I've highlighted the two here, and then I can route those to this track only. I'll just rename that as the clap group. And as you can see, that actually controls both of those channels now. So just to go over those again, we've got a snare, a short clap, and then a long clap, and together they kind of all layered up. They just sit on every other kick really nicely. And then, as I did with the clap, I'd also look to group the percussion along here as well into a single group, and then again, even possibly all of that into another one, and that just makes life a lot easier for controlling tempos, volume, sorry, against the kick. So by highlighting all of those, you drop those all in there. There's also a hard snare and a crash, which you can see on the left hand side there, but I'm going to add them last because they don't really play a part in kind of the main percussion. And then finally, just to get the percussion all in one, I'd put this percussion group and that clap group into one group here. So I've left the kick out of it because I don't want to add anything to the kick really, certainly not compression or anything like that, and if I did I wouldn't want it at the same ratio that I would be putting the rest of the percussion and drums at. Okay, and now we can start going through some light EQ options for each track, and we're going to start with the kick. And for this I'm just going to use all FL Studio stuff for anyone that's starting out, so although I would probably use some other plugins as preference for this tutorial, I'm just going to use the built-in FL Studio ones. So you can see there the kick, and the difference it makes when I boost some certain frequencies, which I'm not actually going to do. May roll off some low end potentially. Just a bit low in there, but that was probably all I would do, and I wouldn't even necessarily do that, to be honest. I mean, kick's kind of already well EQ'd, and the rest of the stuff minus the kick, which runs through this drum group here, I would roll off some low end definitely. Add a little bit of brightness to it, a bit high end. And on the clap, going to add in some light distortion. So it's slightly harsher now, and we'll cut through the mix with more going on when you've got leads and other bits in the track playing as well. Just sounds a bit more gritty and a bit more kind of ravey than the other one did when it was a bit duller. And then on this drum group, mute the kick. I'd add some light compression just to glue them all together. Again, it's not something that has to be like, it just doesn't have to be, you have to add compression to it. And I kind of like this multi-band compressor if I had to go with any of the FL like standard plugins. And then there's, I think it's the 2.9, which is kind of, I've actually taken off with that. It adds a bit high end, so I've actually taken off what I originally put on. And then at this point I can add in, if I want the crash, sorry. And I haven't added the crash, so that won't be part of any of the groups. That's just going to be completely separate, which is why I left that out. And last but definitely not least, the snare, which will just create the kind of tension at the going into the next part. I mean, there's loads of different patterns you could do. I'm just kind of going to throw this one together just to give you an idea of how a snare roll works. You've probably heard it in tracks like intros, especially if you DJ. It'll generally build up a snare roll and then it'll go into the kick and bass. Well, it's 2018, so it'll just go straight into a breakdown, but you know what I mean. Double these up at the end. Okay, and one final thing. I'm just going to check some of the levels. Bring the volume of the clap down slightly, I think. You don't have to take these levels as gospel. I mean, kind of use your ears. The kick definitely sit that around sort of like 6 to 10, as I said earlier. 8's a good preference. But yeah, that's it. That pretty much concludes my very quick rundown on how to do drums in a hardcore track in 2018. If you want these samples, you can grab them separately. from the description below. And also, if you are an FL Studio user, you need to be on FL20. You can grab this entire template, and on that template I've added EQs into separate channels going along here, so each channel have some EQ, and that's just to help you guys get on your way, really, if you want to kind of like fast track and just get moving and get a track started. So that's it from me. I'd love to hear some comments, love to kind of like get some opinions on things, and if there's anything else you want to learn, please feel free to drop a comment, and I will endeavour at some point to go through that in another tutorial. Thank you so much for tuning in, and stay tuned for some more Jakka-B ravey tutorials coming to you soon. Thank you very much. Bye.